Welcome to IB Unplugged, a Cognity podcast for IBDP educators that tackles your submitted questions and challenges by connecting you with experts and peers who share their ideas and stories from real classrooms. Hi, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of IB Unplugged, where we get to talk with Rita Bateson. And we are so excited about this episode because basically, John and I, when we were at the global conference, we went into this session, we heard her speak, and we just look at each other and we're like, we're going to get her on the show. So afterwards, we waited in line patiently to talk to her. And we said, hi, Rita, thank you so much. Let's talk about everything you just did, but even longer. So luckily, she agreed for it. And we are, really excited about this episode.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Rita, it doesn't take long of talking with her before you realize like this is somebody who's at the top of her game. She's got such a really deep understanding of education and the IB. And now looking into kind of stepping outside of the classroom briefly to just say like, what do educators need to do? What do they need to know? How can I navigate the space of ethical use of AI, principled use of AI, how to center students as agents and learning their own voice and that sort of thing in this new developing space? I think what I really, really appreciate about Rita is she recognizes how much work educators are doing and how impossible it can be to do that deep work to make sure that you're prepared for students. And she's done it. And so, we really wanted to chat with her so that she can share some of these strategies and these ideas with teachers so that we can implement them in our classes now.
Yeah, and she is the classic person who has walked the walk. She's done every element of working in the IB, and now she gets to go into schools all over the world and really help them with this transition period and really making teachers and staff feel confident and really aware and reflective on really good use cases. So it's a great balance that we are hitting here on talking about these really important topics, but also having really practical, sound ways of moving forward.
So we're super excited for you. Thanks for joining us again here at IB Unplugged. And let's get on to the show with Rita Bateson. Hi, Rita. Welcome to IB Unplugged. We're so glad you're here.
Hi, both. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Absolutely. We're really looking forward to diving into a conversation about ethical AI and education. I came across you. My first interaction with you was at the IB Global Conference and seeing you in a panel. And I just thought we have got to chat a little bit more with Rita and share some of this knowledge that you've got. So I'm really excited for our listeners and for anybody else who might come across this episode because I think you've got some really valuable stuff when we start talking about ethical AI. But before we get into the deep dives of what we're talking about, can you just give us a brief overview? Let's get to know you a little bit better. Why did you get into education?
Sure thing. I am an IB educator through and through. I've been in this world now for about 20-something years. Originally, I was a fourth generation teacher, so I tried to buck the trend and not do it for a long time, but it did not work. It pulled me back in because there's something different, right? There's something special about being in the classroom and that moment of like effervescence that you get when you're doing it really well and the kids are really with you. So that's my addiction and my temptation into this world. I have been in very many IB schools around the world, but also at the IB global headquarters in The Hague, where I was senior curriculum manager, a job that I was so good at, it doesn't exist anymore. The senior strand manager for math and science.
I worked myself out of the job.
They retired that jersey when I left. So working through PYP up to DPCP for math and science. And then I wrote some IB textbooks, the last framework for MYP, and then opened an IB school here in Dublin as head of secondary for Nord Anglia. So living that whole IB continuum life, dream, world, whatever it might be. So loving it. I love the IB's philosophies. I get frustrated, of course, sometimes with things that everybody gets frustrated with. But a couple of years ago when AI came along, it was time to think, okay, how does this impact the classroom? How does this impact school leaders? What does it mean to curriculum itself? And most importantly, I guess, what does it mean to teaching and learning? And so that's where we end up today. So I spent the last 2 years pretty much trying to figure out what is really important to think about and know, and what's essentially a distraction, a hype, a waste of time. And because I have the time and capacity to do that, then I want to share that with IB schools.
Nice. And I think I love effervescence as the experience in the classroom, but obviously after all of this time, you've kind of had to step out of the classroom. And what is effervescent about your current job?
That's a great question. I like the fact that you can bring together the common sense knowledge of what happens in a school, that realistic approach with an idealism of what pedagogy really should still be, no matter what AI either tries to do for us or tries to take away from us, that's really important. That there's this phenomenon of coalescent effervescence, right? When you bring the right people into the right space with the right intentions, I think that's really exciting. And so as we're working on an AI curriculum, as we work on professional learning opportunities for staff, the question always comes back to the idea that the IB always has, right? My favorite line in the mission statement is other people with their differences can also be right. And that's never been more important than right now with the AI, with pedagogy, with ed tech, with tech bros, you name it. We need to hold on to our values. We need to redefine where necessary. And I think we need to protect knowledge and learning and what that actually means for that's the effervescence, right? When you know you're doing the right things for the right purposes at the right time, that's really special.
Rita, you got me pumped already. I mean, obviously, you've ticked every box on the bingo card of IB and, talking about what's important when it comes to education and navigating this space. Let's get into it. Let's talk about kind of the key things here. And I guess the first part, ethics and principles for AI and education and how schools can be navigating this. So maybe let's just start with a basic fundamental. What does ethical AI actually mean, and specifically in IB schools?
Well, I think because the IB has such high ideals and really positive intentions, I think every school feels it, but we feel it especially. I think that we want to get it right. And at the moment, when there's no clear definition of what right actually means in this context, we know when we come to ethics, we know there are certain things that we have to worry about with AI, right? We know that it hallucinates, it doesn't. Humans hallucinate, it confabulates, but we know that these errors happen. So suddenly we have an existential threat to knowledge acquisition. We know that it's biased because it's built on flawed data. And those two things are commonplace to discuss with students. And I think that's really important. And what's not being discussed enough is the mediocrity sometimes of the output, that students are accepting convincing answers, that teachers are sharing blah or predictable or less inspiring resources than they would have done maybe 2 or 3 years ago because of the convenience. But also I think ethical use of AI is knowing when to use it and when not to protect students' learning. And then there's another dimension, which I'm sure people are tired of hearing me go on about, but it's sustainability too. The sustainability of the power consumption, the energy demands of AI, those are incredible. And I shared just before we came on that I'm worried constantly that we're going to experience a power cut here in Dublin because we are so overwhelmed with AI demand for the data centres. So they're actively having to divert power to make sure the data centres don't go down. So that is always first and foremost in my thinking. When we use AI in education, is it making our classroom environment richer? Is it serving our kids in a way that we cannot previously or couldn't for whatever reason, whether it's resources or intention or time? Is it making our interactions with one another richer as well? Or is it reducing the struggle, the productive struggle for students? And I think if we are using it ethically, we're considering before we reach for AI and we're evaluating afterwards. And if we're doing that process, then we're much more grounded, then we're much more ethically positioned to say, okay, this was a really valid use case, or this was a complete waste of my time. And I'm just doing more memes and I'm just arguing with the AI and I'm just doing ridiculous, the things that we all do is experimentation. What we're trying to do is have schools consider what ethical experimentation looks like, as opposed to reckless experimentation, which is where we found ourselves kind of understandably for the last 2 years.
I remember one of the key things, I actually wrote it down when you mentioned it in the seminar too. You said, over 50% of Dublin's power grid right now is kind of going to data centers. And then you said, it's not going to hospitals. It's not going to, our grocery stores and food and that sort of thing. And it just stuck with me so much to recognize, like when we say ethical, we don't just mean academic integrity. We don't just mean, am I doing things the right way in terms of sourcing knowledge and that sort of stuff, but also do I really need this? Because it is taking a bunch of energy that could be otherwise utilized in really effective ways. So, thanks for outlining that for us.
And am I thinking long term too, right? Because that's the other thing. Am I thinking what it's doing to my cognition? Like we as adults, we already notice the impacts because we notice the difference. But students who are developing, if they don't have time to develop their own voice, then they can't compare it to the AI output and say, okay, this doesn't sound like me. If they don't have time to build those thought processes that they offload to AI, then we're doing them a serious disservice long term.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's one that's really interesting to me is, like you said, that mediocrity piece and that fear of that becoming the norm. And what, from your side, what do you think that schools can do to ensure that AI is enhancing and not replacing the human learning and really fighting back on that temptation of mediocrity being enough and like, okay, this is good. Let's just keep going.
I think ideally, because we've been dealing with this for like 2.5, nearly 3 years now, I think it's a really good time to take stock now. We focused on AI literacy because we had to. We wanted students to use it wisely and well. And we were very worried about assessment. Like, what does it do to academic integrity? And I think that was the right place to be in for the first year or so. And then we started to grapple with ethics. And I think that is such a sinkhole, right? That is a black hole of need that we have to worry about and that you could easily lose yourself in despondency. So I think our responsibility now in this kind of 3rd, 4th year of academia with AI is to make sure that people have the tools that they need so that they can go a little bit deeper. So they understand how the mechanics of AI works. They understand how it's impacting students' lives so that we can then free up bandwidth to think about what it's doing to student well-being, to think about sustainability, to think about safeguarding, to think about the deeper, sometimes darker topics that we need to, so that we can lead them with confidence, so that we can say, okay, we don't know everything, but now we know enough to make really good choices going forward. To say, we now want a culture of like deliberate AI use or discerning AI use because our goal is to maintain a standard, because our goal is to be responsible for learning itself. One of the nicest moments I ever had in a development meeting at the IB was when we were talking about the learner profile. And we all love the learner profile, right? Especially risk taker for some reason is far and away the most popular one.
I think it's just because it's the only hyphenated one.
I think it's because it's the one that listens to be a little cheeky.
It's like it just sticks with the kids.
Yeah. They're like, oh, can I be risky? Fantastic. One of the participants, he said, we always talk about caring as if it's for people, but shouldn't we be caring for the subjects, for which we represent to the students, our passions? And I thought that's such a good way of thinking about it. We need to care for education as it's kind of facing this onslaught of AI diminishing it or demeaning it or replacing. You said there, Courtney, replacing. That's a huge risk. We see that in kids' work at the moment. We see it, let's be honest, in adults' work at the moment. I don't have to look long on LinkedIn to see a huge amount of AI slop. I'm getting it in emails. I'm getting it in the frequency and volume of approaches by companies. So it's hyper accelerating. And we have to then as educators say, okay, well, not in that direction. That's part of the reason we chose Eblana as our company name. Eblana is the old name for Dublin, and it's where they sent out missionaries and scholars to establish educational institutions around Europe. And in those monasteries, they would replicate the sacred texts. Have either of you ever been to Dublin? Have you seen the Book of Kells? It's an example of one of these.
Yeah.
Unless it was in the Guinness factory, I didn't see it.
Definitely in the store. You could definitely find it in the store. So they would replicate these sacred texts of knowledge, and they would, illuminate them and illustrate them and make them beautiful. And then as the Dark Ages burned through, they protected these sacred texts with their lives. And some of the only copies of ancient Greek we have are because of these monks protecting what was important and innovating while doing so. And I think that's the message we have to hold on to. While AI burns around us, what's going to be still important for humanity? What's going to be important for truth telling? What will be really important to communicate? We're an unbroken chain of knowledge through the generations, and we as teachers can't be the last stop on that train, right? We need to be able to communicate what is still important to know, to value, to have skills for the future. And that's a tall order on top of a full-time job and concerns about social media and everything else that we worry about in schools.
Yeah, I like what you're saying about it's so easy to talk about as adults. When you look on LinkedIn, for example, I always say like so much of it is trash. But because we know better, like you said earlier with students, like we know what looks like AI slop, but if all content that they're consuming is trash, as I eloquently said, then they're not going to even realize what the good stuff is. And I think that that's also really important. I'm not saying that good stuff can't have AI use. It's just, it can't be poorly done, and they have to know how to use it well.
Yeah.
And when to use it too.
But I thought that we had a greater degree of AI sensitivity, right? I thought that we saw through that quicker. And then over the last couple of months, I hear from schools that students are starting to really push back on teacher use. Like they recognize AI in their reports. They recognize AI in their feedback. And I've heard a couple of students say to me, if I wanted ChatGPT feedback, I could have done that myself. I wanted a human to read it. I wanted the expert to tell me what they think. And that gave me hope. Like, that really did. I thought, okay, great. Their sensitivity is also finely tuned. The irony, of course, that we're giving them AI feedback on their AI work didn't escape them either, so that's important too. But I think we need to have a very realistic, honest conversation and be much more transparent in our AI use. I think that's what the ethical part really comes down to. We're modeling for students. And if we're modeling that it's a shadow tool, if we're modeling that it's a secret hack that everybody knows about, but not everybody knows that everybody knows, as Pinkerty would say, I think there's something really important in that we need to have a very different conversation.
Becoming a better IBDP educator is a daily practice informed through reading, research, personal experience, and episodes from IB Unplugged, like the one you're listening to right now. But sometimes the show can go a bit too quickly, or we simply forget some of the key points once we're out of the car or back from our walk. So to revisit the content in a condensed version, you can download the episode summary at cognity.com/IB Unplugged. You'll find useful links to other resources and exciting bits of information that you can use immediately in your daily practice. So now, back to the show.
Now, I know we'll get into like specific classroom strategies, but as we're there to try to navigate that as educators there, are there specific frameworks or questions we should be asking? Like, I'm very familiar with like the, traffic light system, for example. We try to use that with like, okay, red, you can't be using AI right now, amber a bit more, but are there specific frameworks that you've come across that you feel like these are the things that are going to really help educators guide that ethical use and that ethical consideration before diving into AI?
I think so. And I think, as you said, most of the focus has been on the output or the assessment model, really thinking about what should be allowed and not allowed in certain circumstances. And I think we're in a much more nuanced place than that now this year. In terms of actual reach for AI, and teachers will tell me this, they'll say that their Teams groups have gone really quiet since the pandemic. Their Google Classroom chats have gone really quiet because kids don't ask each other for help anymore. They're asking AI straight away. So there's a little bit of having to get downstream of assessment. It needs to be in the pedagogy. It needs to be in the curriculum. And I think one of the things that I found most useful is, unfortunately, setting up an account on TikTok to see what students are being bombarded with in terms of go to this humanizing AI and go to this humanizing AI. And the kids who are being constantly kind of told how to hack the system, that was really interesting. And then all these other countercultures that I thought are going to impact how students view AI, how they're kind of experiencing, Courtney, like you said, that, the volume of things that they're seeing, polluting what they consider as normal and consider, all of those things. So one of the frameworks that I try to give with schools is bookending that system. So here is a deliberation station. Before you reach for AI, have you considered the following things? And of course, they might still go and use AI anyway, but it's given them a reflective moment beforehand, like when we reach for single-use plastic or something recyclable. That moment of agency and autonomy is really important. And then after the fact, an evaluation station to say, okay, you did use it. What did you notice? Did it take more time? Did it free up time? Did you use that time wisely? Could you have found the information another way? Did it undermine your memory? Did it, affect are you proud of your work? Because that's a question we don't ask enough. Like, do they still feel ownership on what they're creating? Mm-hmm. And having that framework, because I found it really helps students to be much more, and teachers, because I have one for teachers too, it helps people to be a lot more cognizant of when they're using it and where they're using it. And also underlying all of that, like the energy consumption. Did we really need to generate 4 images when that stock photo already existed and it would have taken one quick Google search? Just a moment to think, okay, is there an alternative? Is there an alternative approach that abides better with my values, that supports our sustainable development goals, and that doesn't deny me the opportunities? Because sometimes AI opportunities are incredible, right? For students and for teachers, it can genuinely save us time. It can give me a resource in any language that I need. It can help me find the right intervention and the right resource for the right student at the right time. And all of those things are worth exploring. So it's not a don't touch, but it's before you reach for it, do I really need it right now? And if so, yes, then absolutely go for it. And let's get the maximum benefit we can. But if not, let's just think about it beforehand. And I think that's not a culture we've had time to embed in schools yet. So I think that's a framework worth considering. The assessment framework side will keep developing, because we know that with the traffic light system, sometimes teachers are scared to go anywhere but green and red, or students struggle with the definition of, well, like, when is it brainstorming? When is it actually writing? When is it generating and editing? When is it just finishing the whole thing for me? So the definitional problem exists there too. But I think as educators, we're the ones who get to define those parameters now. I feel like this is the year where we can build a moat around students and we can decide, okay, this is what it means for cognition. This is what it means for dependency. This is what we actually want our students to continue to know, with or without AI.
I think this really ties into the next theme that we want to go into, which is about centering students and agency. We've talked about, you have the literacy part, you talk about building that moat around the students and then kind of the expectations and the framework. But then if the students aren't on board with it, like you said, they're just going to do it anyway. Yeah. And that just then becomes a conflict rather than a partnership in, like, we're doing this together and these are our frameworks. And I'm wondering if you have advice on kind of what this conversation can look like when you bring students into it and kind of have them be founding members of this kind of structure of how you guys work together in the classrooms.
I think we always, in the IB world, right, we always value student voice, and then our processes and our policies have a really good way of quietening that voice down. Once we've gone through the process of listening to them, we don't always hear them.
That hit home for John.
It definitely did.
John, do you want to unpack that for us or double click on it? Like I said the other day, do you want to double click on that?
I don't think I do actually. No, just this. The idea of, we want your voice. Okay, no, just do the thing now.
Thanks so much for your input. As a head of school, I did that. Like I tried to build the most, empowered student council, and then I had to get on with my day. And I was like, okay, that's great. Thanks, kids. And that was really not for me. I saw how very systemic it is that we cannot really. They're also still the kids, right? And we're the grown-ups, and their voice is important, and they don't have the parameters and context that we do. So I think there are certain points. There's a value transmission that's really important. We know what they value, but they are extremely anxious about AI on a certain level. Some are very dependent on it and are aware of that dependency, and it worries them, but not right now. Like a conversation, I visit and meet with students in every school that we work in Eblana Learning, and because it keeps me connected to the classroom, and that's the bit I miss the most. So they will tell me, not what they're doing, but they'll definitely tell me what their friends are doing. And that's really interesting. They can tell me, which are the best humanizers and who uses it and who doesn't. And over the last 6 months, the conversation has very much turned to, well, I don't use AI, but the kids who do are doing better than me, and that's not fair. And I think that's a really interesting topic. And other students have told me, I don't like AI because it has ruined the game for everybody. And they're the kind of kids who would have done well before anyway. They're the kids who figure out what the code is, and they figure out how to hack the system, and now they're annoyed that everybody else can hack the system. And I think that's really interesting as a phenomenon. We have students who tell me they don't want to use it because they're artists and they're creatives, and they really disagree with what it's done to the world of intellectual property and creativity. And I think hearing those voices, taking all that input in, and then making the best possible choices for those kids is where we're at now. Because up to now we were AI police to some extent, or we were AI cheerleaders, but we have to have a much more reasoned and rational perspective now. But I think it is important. The students, we often feel that the students have leapfrogged us. So we want to hear from them and learn from them. But the more I speak to students, I realize that they have only leapfrogged us in a very narrow, specific way. Like they are very, very good at using AI for that 1 or 2 or 3 things that they want to do. And they don't have a wide angled lens. So that's our responsibility, is to say to them, yes, but have you considered using it this way? Have you considered using it this way? Have you considered the dangers of using it this one and the benefits of this way? So I think we get to bring that seasoned kind of veteran old person perspective to them. But their opinions are so varied. Their opinions are more varied than ours, which is really interesting because they're living it more distinctly. They're living it fresh for the first time, and we're seeing it with much more kind of mature eyes, I guess. We've lived through Google and Wikipedia and the internet, but it's all coming to them at once. And they've also, it's really interesting, they've all kind of, not all of them, that's not a fair thing to say, but most kids that I speak to under 12 have homogenized the whole world to just be AI. It's not computers or CGI or Photoshop. Everything to them is AI. And that is an interesting phenomenon. I don't know what to make of that yet, but that's really interesting.
As you were talking there, it reminds me so much of a lot of educational theory that's been here for years and years. I was just reading this morning, again, kind of refreshing on like student motivations and the difference between like, motivated learning for performance versus for mastery. And we established this well back in the 80s with this idea of, education systems that are more about mastery. You see so much more come from students, both in terms of their skills and their knowledge and what they can do down the road. Whereas it feels like AI has just sort of taken that spotlight and put it straight on mastery, straight on performance when it comes to the mind of the student. And they kind of see like, well, I have to perform on this task or I have to turn in this particular piece of work. And so I will use AI to then give this perfect version of myself or this perfect performance, if you will, on this particular assessment, and almost makes it harder for us as educators to stay in that mastery element of like the whole point here is that you develop, not just that you perform perfectly every time. We want to see development. We want to see you grow and assist in that growth. So like, how can we be empowering students a bit more, I guess, with that mindset first? Like, we want you to develop mastery here, and that's going to lead to more responsible use of AI, more reflective use of AI, more sustainable use of AI, as opposed to just being so focused on the performance aspect.
That's a great question. Let me think about that. I think probably the place where I source hope from is the undeniable truth that really good writers can get really good writing out of ChatGPT, and that incredible artists can describe and get the best results. So you need that expertise. So that part is still valuable. So demonstrating and communicating that part to students, I think, is really valuable. The mastery part is very different. The performative element of education, especially in the IB diploma years, right? We know they feel the treadmill of expectations. We know they feel the high stakes of that educational environment so strongly in the later years of MYP and certainly in DP. That if AI were to come for some of those elements of assessment, I would not cry myself to sleep at night. I would be okay if we could get rid of some of those tick boxes for students, that they are performing in that way simply to get through to the next step, to the next step, to the next step. And I think that is the opportunity of AI.
Sure.
Like, that would be incredible if we could do genuinely valid and reliable group assessments, or if we could find ways that introverts can express themselves better and actually we could understand what they truly know as opposed to how well they respond to stressful environments. I think that would be incredible. So I think that idea of unlocking a variety of ways of demonstrating mastery and demonstrating proficiency. I mean, when I think about the potential futures of assessment, one of the things I'm most optimistic about is that it would genuinely clear all of the weeds of assessment that we have to go through, the mechanisms that we do just to be able to test them reliably and validly. That would be a really interesting, like what I'm watching some of the 16 plus developments in the diploma, for example, with excitement for this reason, because it is going to force us to think about what truly matters in education and what truly doesn't. And we've been saying this for a very long time, right? Sir Ken Robinson has been saying this forever. We've all been saying we need to rethink education, and we were given a golden opportunity in the pandemic and we all chose not to. We chose to go straight back to what we were doing before because we wanted to be together. We wanted to learn together. And then I have to ask myself, okay, well, is the scale of change too big, or is maybe education not that broken? And that's a really difficult question to wrestle with. Like, I'm not sure how I feel about that, but I am excited about the opportunities. I take an analogy from, there was a company that allowed people to send their AI avatars to meetings, and it could represent them and it could speak for them. And within 2 weeks, nobody was attending the meetings. They just sent their avatars. So maybe meetings are less, or maybe emails are exposed by AI as not being our be all and end all. Maybe we have to go back to meeting in person, having conversations, having a human relationship, because the AI can do the tedious work. So if we could get rid of the tedium of education, but of assessment, I'd be okay with that. I think I spend a lot of time now thinking about what AI-proof assessment can look like. And it's very, very challenging work. I think anyone will tell you that, right? There is no answer right now. We haven't had our turnitin.com moment, not really. And something will give. And I think that's fascinating and terrifying in equal measure. But I think for the moment, that doesn't really answer your question. But essentially, I think that's where we have to have an honest acknowledgement of where we are right now. And that's kind of where we're at.
There's an excitement element there too, like this sort of disruption that AI is causing. Recently the UNESCO report on AI in education, that sort of thing. There was one article where I was reading in there where it was like 90% of our assessment strategies right now are at risk of Gen AI. Like they are vulnerable to Gen AI. So it has to force us to rethink what's valuable, what's useful, and that sort of thing. And even as I was kind of walking into my office this morning, I was thinking back to my days in school and thinking like, how did we actually cover all these sort of issues that are going on in my head with school right now? Like, how did we cover those without tech the way that we have it right now? And I'm not saying, we have to like revert to dark ages or something like that, but it just seems like this disruptive moment from AI is a really great opportunity, as you just described with the pandemic before, to then rethink what are we valuing in education. And because obviously, what we assess ultimately is kind of what gets taught and what we end up valuing. And so how can we be shifting that assessment model? How can we shift like the performance element to stay in that mastery thing? There's an element of this that is exciting, even though I know like it's just got to be so difficult to think of like, how do you AI proof an assessment to really understand a person? Because our current models are definitely vulnerable.
But I think what's interesting with it is like in so many of the episodes that we've done in the past, we've talked, nobody likes the assessment. The way it's not like, oh no, how do we save this precious thing that we love about education? It's something that nobody, like you said, Rita, like you're not going to miss it when it's gone. And I think that's why it is a good opportunity as well. It's so many times the teachers we bring in here, like, no, we want to be looking at skills and we want to be looking at the learner profile and all of these other pieces and the mastery to a certain extent as well. But I think that it's a really good way of looking at it of this is our opportunity to get rid of the thing that none of us actually like to begin with. And I think that even like when we talked with Matt Glanville from the IB, it's like he's the director of assessment and even he's not happy with the way things are right now. And he's excited about the way it can go. And I think that being really clear in the value of why you're using Gen AI, what are you actually trying to achieve with it? And then what do we want to assess on the human part? That is the shifting way of looking at it rather than trying to protect or prevent generative AI from taking away from the broken thing that nobody really wants to keep the way it is anyway.
And that's really interesting because I've spent probably the last 8 months trying to figure this out in terms of where is it going to, like, what does this truly mean for pedagogy and what does it truly mean for assessment? And everybody else has too, right? But I think you get to the edge of the cliff and you get quite nervous and you back off and then we develop some structures to hold us in place for the moment, like the traffic light system or the AI, AS, all of these things. And I just kept trying to look over the cliff and think, okay, Google and Wikipedia and the internet came for knowledge. So we pivoted to skills, right? And we really invested in transferring of information and constructing new knowledge. And we really did pivot to skills. And then AI came for skills. So what does that leave us with in terms of what is truly valuable now? And I keep landing back with like attitudes, values, competencies, all of those things. But competencies are also very vulnerable. So as we developed, we've spent, the last however many months trying to develop an AI curriculum so schools can embed it quickly and easily without friction, and that's quite challenging, and a assessment of AI. So eventually we are going to have to assess how well kids can actually interact with AI and the ethics therein. And I keep coming back to these ethical dilemmas, these ways of embodiment. I mean, embodied learning is going to be huge now, right? Because we know that there are screen time issues. We know that there are attention regulation and retention issues happening in schools. So we have a ton of problems that are all coalescing together at once, which is really, really exciting in terms of the hard and important work that we do as educators. But when I look at the assessments, I think we're going to see a rise in like micro internships or sim-turnships, or there's going to be a modeling in education that we've never been able to do of the real world that students will find themselves in. The fact that we can all join together and have a podcast and develop ideas and nobody's going to grade us at the end of it, we're just going to enjoy it and we're just going to learn from each other. I think there's something in that. The fact that students will go into a world where they're constantly interacting with others and their experiences are shaped by others, and we don't value that in isolated learning. opportunities like we give them all the time. And I think there's also something, and I keep testing the edges of AI to see how good it's getting at sentiment analysis and power dynamics and, the opportunities to equalize educational experiences for students. And it's getting scary good, like scary good. So I think that's really interesting as well.
It's because you're training it, aren't you?
I'm giving it too much of my thought process, clearly. It would be really interesting. We can record meetings and it can tell us, who spoke over whom the most, who spoke the most frequently, whose ideas were the best quality, whose ideas were stomped over. Those are really interesting phenomenon, and it's getting particularly good at that. And it doesn't even need the tone analysis. It doesn't need the eye contact like we humans do. So I think there are exciting opportunities there too, to model in the classroom and in education what kids are going to genuinely do once they finish third level education. It's probably a definition of fourth level education. What do we need them to do beyond university? Not career readiness, because who knows which careers will still exist. That's a different thing, right? That's a very different conversation, but we need them to be life ready. And we've always focused on life-worthy learning. Mm-hmm. Now we probably just have to think about life learning, what that's going to look like.
It's a different way of thinking about AI literacy. Like so far, whenever I talk with colleagues or other educators about AI literacy, it's kind of in that assessment model. It's like, how can I be literate and safe with using AI, in forms of integrity? But what you've just described is a very different way of thinking about AI literacy. What are ways that, teachers can be integrating that definition of AI literacy into like our inquiry-based learning or our skills development, stuff we're doing in the classroom?
Well, I think it's a great time to be able to rethink, especially for PYP and MYP teachers, where there is an opportunity for development and there is a moment where the curriculum is being revisited or some of the criterion are changing or some of the learning progressions in PYP invite us to now embed AI practices in there a lot more easily. We're not dealing with a rigid structure of a 7-year curriculum review right now. We have a really nice opportunity. The IB is saying we are looking at developments here, here, and here. So why not embed some of those literacy things? So come on over to the EblanaLearning.com website. We have lots of free resources on there for teachers. As teachers ourselves, we just like to give away things for free as much as we can. And in there, you'll find things like the stations that I talked about, the evaluation, deliberation. But more importantly, informing ourselves of the risks and opportunities when we have precious little time in our working day. So trying to micro dose some of that educational practice, the sharing out of what's really truly working in terms of ethical, containment or ethical development. We have tons and tons of courses for people who do have time and resources, but more importantly than that, it's a mind shift in terms of let's have a much more balanced ethical consideration here. Let's think about the fact that the first year was dominated by ethics and literacy, and neither of those two camps spoke to each other. It was either everybody doom and gloom and compliance and terror, or shiny, shiny tools. And we need something that straddles both of those worlds, that really is thinking about, okay, we as educators are actually the best judge. We are the adjudicators of taste. We are now the ones who exemplify what we want the quality and standard to look like. We are not sycophantic like AI. Therefore, we have a role to play in this. And I think that's much more helpful for students to understand. AI can do the work if we let it. AI can do the support if we train it. And we then as teachers are much more guiding and mentoring when they should and shouldn't do that. So if you want some kind of insight into practices or languages or ideas that you can embed in classroom, come on over or contact us on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out with questions. We love just helping people kind of along this journey from somewhat, anxious to very well informed, because there's no antidote to anxiety like action, right? We really want to know what we need to know and sometimes know more than that.
So my name is Nathalie Fortier. I work in Montreal at École Internationale Wilfrid Pelletier. I'm a PYP coordinator and I'm working there since the last 23 years. And a small change I made in my teaching is conceptual understanding. So more mapping with students, more thinking, and more also visible thinking routine.
I really like what you're talking about this feeling of empowerment by having action that you can take. And that's something that John and I have always tried to make sure we have in each of our podcast episodes, is this feeling of, I now have something I can take with me that's like, I have all these ideas and all of these things to think about, but then I also want to do something because then I feel like I can apply it somewhere. And so for this last segment, I do want to get more into this practical side of classroom strategies and implementation. And you've gone into a lot of different schools. You've worked with a lot of different teachers. And are there some themes of things that you feel like teachers are doing well when they're introducing AI tools and actually aligning that with IB pedagogy?
Absolutely. I think one of the first things that I would mention is the fact that we really value critical thinking and we rarely give them enough time to practice it in depth. So I think allowing students to understand what your thought processes are around your attitude to different models, because we have the ability to test different models in real time with students and then talk about the output and model that evaluation process for them so that we can move them from critical thinkers to critical discerners. And that's a big journey. So what I would say to teachers is if you are using AI visibly and modeling it for them, have a very clear structure in mind. So one thing that I say to people who are, kind of early on the journey is model for the students your choice of whatever the LLM is. Choose it, show them, and demonstrate to them something like ask it something you're really good at and something you're bad at. And if the thing, let's say, for example, for me, it's always write a statement of inquiry because I can know when it's good and I'll be able to recognize, okay, this model could help me work faster. I can rely on it for this thing. And then I ask it for something I'm really bad at, like birthday present ideas for a 10-year-old. So those two, and then I can see, okay, if it can help me with something I'm bad at, then it's going to help me with efficiency. And having students understand the difference between productivity and efficiency is really important. And then having the confidence to say, do you know what? That model sucked. Because sometimes it's not. It could be you, it could be the model, it could be your prompt. And students don't know how to pick those three things apart. So if we can have that discussion with students and say, okay, maybe it's you, maybe it's the model. For slightly more advanced, it's useful sometimes as well to kind of tackle the ethics things head on. And I've stolen this from the NYP. If you're testing a model for the first time, ask it a factual, a debatable, and a conceptual question or a procedural question. So you can kind of get to the weeds of how well is it trained. It will expose some biases. We know that if you ask certain models questions about geopolitical events in China, for example, you'll get different responses. If you ask them questions about political events in the US, you'll get different responses. So it can reveal a bias there sometimes. Ask it a conceptual question so you can see if it's well tuned to explain to you so you can actually access that information. Ask it a debatable question too. So have some different framing mechanisms to make a decision on those. And I think that's what I'm seeing well when teachers are modeling it well, co-learning and unlearning and relearning in real time with students. That requires a great deal of humility, though, and openness to that kind of open experimentation and the ability to go to kids, you know what, I didn't like that. Let's try a different one. Or, oh, you liked it, did you? Like when you do an image generation, and again, a little caveat, because every time you generate an image, that's 500 milliliters of water and the same energy as charging your phone 3 times. But when we do image generation, having a really good discussion as to how well the prompt adhered to your output so that they can use fewer queries and get what they need quicker. And that's the energy efficient part, right? If we can give them the skills to be able to prompt extremely quickly. Now, in 6 months' time, prompting will probably be dead because the models will be so intuitive and they will know us so well. But for the moment, prompt engineering and context engineering are really important. So building those writing skills, valuing those critical thinking skills, those are really important. Other things I've seen done really well. My husband's an NYP coordinator and he will do a 3-lane development. He's design. So he will allow students to do like a classic sketch, a CAD design and an AI design, and then they'll do comparisons. And he always takes a vote as to which one they prefer. And it's split almost evenly. A third choose each method. So they're having them that diversity of opinion and diversity of thought and subjective values. I think those are really important to make space for those in thinking, teaching and learning as well. So I would say if you can have a couple of tricks up your sleeve to be able to discuss the models in somewhat confident, or at least you can bluff confidence, that would be really good. Talk about things like tokens and things like that. But ultimately, the kids are looking to us for leadership on this. They don't need to learn it from TikTok. It would be better if we have a value conversation in class, and they can have the literacy conversation offline. They can have AI teach AI to them at another point. That's not the valuable, important part. The values, the attitudes, the dispositions, and the character development, that's what's going to be important.
That's super, super useful and highly practical. And you could tell, like, oh yeah, as you were talking, I'm like, I could use that idea right away. And now I'm not trying to promo it, but I'm like, oh, I actually do want to just pop into Eblana and let me see some of these other resources here as well. Because, as I've kind of gone into this space as an educator, there are those elements of just feeling a bit overwhelmed and as though like I need to give this some proper think time, but I'm not quite sure where to get going on it. So I really appreciate that sort of here are some very practical, easy ways to kind of get at it. And I especially like that shift from critical thinking to critical discernment, and then, asking those conceptual, debatable questions and really, thinking through that deeply. I think that's quite useful. Is there any sort of like list of absolute don'ts? Like as an educator, definitely do not do this, when you're saying experiment a little bit with this or try this thing with AI. Are there things that you would advise to educators to just be like, yeah, do these things, but don't do this stuff?
There's a few, and some of them again are linked to my own Irish Catholic guilt. So feel free to dismiss them or not accordingly. But I think for me, in terms of the energy, the earlier we can teach them the skills of very effective AI use, the less they are going to consume and burn, because they'll be able to use it wiser, and teaching them not to argue with a hallucination. Like, don't try and fight the AI. Don't try and bully the AI. And this happens in a lot of schools where the kids try and correct the AI and they're just burning energy as they go through. So things like that are really important to communicate with students. If you are in a wormhole, if you're in if you are just getting deeper and deeper the rabbit hole with an AI conversation, start a new thread, like straight away, just forget about it, just move on. Getting kids to kind of organize their threads, their projects, their gems, whatever the terminology is in the preferred schools LLM, that's something that's important. There is a huge, huge element here in terms of safeguarding and students' well-being that we need to, it's probably too big for the scope of this conversation right now. But with teachers, I would just urge caution. If you define and design a chatbot for students, it can be really helpful. It can also be a major distraction, because now they're in a new environment that they want to test and see if they can get it to say a racist term, or see if they, they have certain hacks that are quite amusing and quite interesting, and also a complete deviation from the task at hand. So, judicious use where possible. If it adds value, if it serves the kids in a way that you can't, if it makes your classroom environment richer, then do it. But if not, then it is a distraction. It is a shiny tool that hasn't made learning any deeper or better or more lasting, because we still need a productive struggle for kids. So I think that's something. From the energy perspective as well, I would say it's very tempting to play with the video generation. It's very tempting to play with the world model, these immersive models, but there's such high energy use that I would just say, wait, let's not buy the first iPhone. Let's just wait until the next more efficient models come along. So don't encourage students into those. They're already in gaming environments. They don't need to be messing around with world models yet. I think with another thing is that for school leaders, and as a school leader perspective, I think it's really important that school leaders are on top of this now. They need to know what's happening, especially because of the EU AI Act and, China's K-12 curriculum development, and Saudi Arabia has an AI curriculum. We need to be led from the front sometimes. Like, policies should be coming bottom up, and governance should be top down, because there's so many teachers. If I were in school right now, there is no way I could do this level of research and reflection that I'm able to do, that I can distill for schools, and I can say, listen, this is important, this is not. I could not do that if I were in a school right now. So an honest acknowledgement of that, and an ability to say, okay, well, we need trusted sources of information. And as we sometimes wait for the IB to release stuff, the IB process takes a long time for translation and publication and things. And in the meantime, people are filling that space with, advice from LinkedIn, which can change on the daily, and, press releases and new models and everything. It is massively overwhelming. So choose less to do and do it well. Choose fewer things to experiment with. Because I think that is part of the overwhelm, right? The constant bombarding of like, oh, try this, try this, try this. We don't need all of those things. We need a few things that will genuinely help our students or give us time back as teachers, and the rest are not important. When it comes to grading, I would definitely put up a kind of a go slow flag on grading, just to be careful for the moment. It is too early at the moment to hand over entire grading mechanisms to AI, because of the inbuilt bias and because of the desire to please. Like, I do a lot of testing with this, and I find that depending on the model, it will either consistently be too harsh, too gentle, or sometimes it will just trend to the middle to be safe, just like human markers. So I think it's really important to go very slowly with that, and always have a quality check system of some kind. If you're writing reports, make sure that human eyes are on those reports. They don't leave the building without human quality checking. That's really important because we're responsible. We now have a reputational risk as teachers. We don't want to be the one who uses AI too much or too little in our classroom. We want to get it right, and we have no time to do that. So that's kind of where we come in, where we want to help schools with that. Because I listen to 50 podcasts a week on triple speed. I watch you guys all the time. I try and see who's thinking about things differently, who's doing the hard yards here, and how can they share that information with everybody else. And that's the beauty of the IB community, right? We always do that for one another. Everybody wants the best for our fellow and sister schools. And when something works, it's great to share. And when something is a disaster, it's important to share. So I think it's a really good space to find ourselves in right now. I don't see other national systems don't have that level of cohesion and goodwill that we seem to be very lucky to have.
Yeah, definitely. Rita, I just feel like I've just gone through one of the most valuable PD sessions that I've been in the last year or so. There's been so much just really valuable thinking to go through with this. And I think you laid out so many things really well, just, really considering, again, what's my ethical use here and how am I practically bringing this in? What are the skills that I value? But, especially those practical tips and that sort of thing. I think there's an element of fear that I've had with regard to integrating and teaching well. And just as you say, being a leader with my students with regard to like, how am I teaching AI use ethically and responsibly? And just this conversation has kind of helped calm some of those fears, and knowing that there's like specific things that we can do to make it better for teachers and for students in learning. This has just been a hugely valuable conversation. Rita, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to chat with us and sharing all this stuff. I'm sure that our listeners are also pretty psyched right now. Thank you so much.
Well, please do. Connect with me on LinkedIn. I share a lot of important trends to notice, things to ignore. Just kind of like I said, microdosing that PD just in manageable amounts. And it's so interesting. Whenever I human write the engagement, you can tell the difference. People respond to human writing now, right, in a different way.
Definitely. Great. Well, thank you so much, Rita. It's been such a pleasure to have you on here talking about all of this. We're really, really pumped about it, and hope we get to talk to you again soon.
Thanks, you guys. I really enjoyed that. Thank you so much for asking me to join you, and let's keep the conversation going.
IB Unplugged is a Cognity podcast hosted by John Patton and Courtney Marlene and produced by Catalina Gaffney. Be sure to subscribe or follow and share with your fellow IB educators. If you'd like to submit a topic, request, or question, please do so on cognity.com/IB Unplugged. Let's keep the conversation going and support each other in teaching with confidence, creativity, and joy. See you next time.